You're listening to This Week in Cardiology from theheart.org on Medscape.
You can now access the latest in medical news on your Amazon Alexa-enabled device. Join me, Perry Wilson, every weekday morning for Medscape Medical Minute, where I highlight the top medical stories of the day. To add Medscape Medical Minute to your flash briefing, search for Medscape Medical Minute on Amazon and click Enable. Or open the Amazon Alexa app, go to Skills, search for Medscape Medical Minute, and click Enable. Then say, Alexa, what's the news? Or Alexa, what's my flash briefing? I hope you'll join us.
Hi everyone, this is John Mandrola from theheart.org Medscape Cardiology, and this is This Week in Cardiology for January 10th, 2020. This week, more on the XL trial, peripartum cardiomyopathy, marathoning, hotspotting, and leadership and innovation. My friends, there will soon be a week when the news does not involve the controversial XL trial of left main PCI versus bypass surgery, but that week is not here yet. Patrice Wendling reports that the Cardiovascular Research Foundation, CRF, has authorized an independent review to examine its role in the XL trial. The nonprofit organization was engaged at the outset of the trial by the XL sponsor, Abbott, and that was to organize independent clinical endpoint committees and to perform specific analyses. Quote, "Because of our commitment to excellence, we have commissioned an independent review of the matter," a CRF spokesperson said in a statement. Now, this review will only address CRF's role in the study, not the XL results themselves. The spokesperson also said, or declined to say, who is conducting the review, noting that that was confidential information. Now, another notable Patrice Wendling has in her news story was that the Society of Thoracic Surgeons have yet to weigh in on this controversy. The European Society of Cardiothoracic Surgery issued another letter this week in which they reached out to the PIs of XL to offer assistance in resolving the concerns raised about this trial. The European surgeons write that trials like XL depend on much-needed financial investment from industry, and their results definitely drive innovation in clinical practice. But these trials are only possible thanks to the generosity of patients who altruistically agree to take part in the expectation that their participation will advance science and improve outcomes for future patients. The European surgeons again made the case for independent analysis of the data and suggested using the Clinical Trials and Methodology Unit at University College London. For sure, there will be more to come on XL in the matter of open data and independent review. In fact, the last two topics of today's podcast will revisit the matter of high-quality evidence. Second topic is peripartum cardiomyopathy. This week, the new journal, JACC Oncology, featured a study on the mysterious condition of peripartum cardiomyopathy, which affects women in their last month of pregnancy or in the first months after delivery. Now, we have all seen this disease, and it's a head shaker. Why does it occur? Are we missing something? Peripartum cardiomyopathy is not just mysterious, it's quite serious. Mortality rates range from 2 to 12% depending on the series. A multinational group led by German and Swedish research teams reported on a cohort study of slightly more than 200 patients with peripartum cardiomyopathy. They specifically looked at the relationship between cancer before and after the peripartum cardiomyopathy diagnosis. This included a history of cancer drugs, as well as exome sequencing for gene variants associated with cancer predisposition syndrome and dilated hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. The control group were age-matched women in German registries. The main findings: first, the authors observed a 16-fold higher prevalence of early-onset cancer in peripartum cardiomyopathy patients when compared with controls. Even after adjustments, the risk of cancer both before and after the peripartum cardiomyopathy diagnosis was still way higher. Among the patients with peripartum cardiomyopathy who had cancer before their pregnancy, many had received chemo or radiation in childhood or adolescence. Patients with peripartum cardiomyopathy who had cancer treated displayed less complete recovery of LV function, Exome sequencing data in 14 of 200 patients found that slightly less than half the patients who had cancer had gene variants that were likely pathogenic or pathogenic for dilated cardiomyopathy or hypertrophic cardiomyopathy or for cancer predisposition syndrome. Also notable, and a possible lead here, was that in 30 additional peripartum cardiomyopathy patients without cancer, there were no cancer predisposing gene variants found. Now, as noted in the editorial, these variants may explain the propensity for patients to get peripartum cardiomyopathy, the connection being that pregnancy-associated cardiac stress is superimposed on cardiac damage accumulated from inefficient or partial repair of previous drug-induced toxicity. The fact that cancer rates are high after peripartum cardiomyopathy raises the possibility that the condition may actually promote cancer development. These findings tempt you to think, whoa, this is a big discovery. In fact, the authors wrote only 2 sentences of limitations. This paper has significant limitations. The control registry doesn't have the same level of capture as the peripartum cardiomyopathy registry might have. The denominator for the event rate in the control arm is the entire population of Germans. It's likely, therefore, that rates of cancer are under-ascertained. The sample size of the peripartum cardiomyopathy group is very small relative to the control arm. Remember, when you sample small numbers, there is a chance that that sample is not representative of the population. The authors did not do a logistic regression because the sample was so small. They just report a ratio of overall cancer compared to the registry. This is not a traditional case control setup, and there is a serious chance of colliders because you select only women hospitalized with peripartum cardiomyopathy. JACC Oncology is a new journal. I hope the editors stay strong and force authors to clearly explain the limits of their studies. Or else regular clinicians like me might be fooled into thinking that we are discovering things faster than we are. Third topic today is marathon training. The Journal of the American College of Cardiology published an elegant study on marathon running. But first, some serious disclosures. I have long held that the marathon is dumb. Super dumb. I mean for average people. If you're a 120-pound athlete who can run the distance in 2 hours or so, that's one thing. But why this exercise and suffering has become so popular amongst the regular public is hard to understand. Perhaps if Pheidippides had had a bike, he might not have died. And then maybe the marathon would not have such lore, and we would measure our fitness on our 5K or 10K times. Next disclosure. I ran my second marathon last year in Rzeszów, Poland, and I plan to run another this year to redeem myself for cracking in the last few kilometers. I know, it's irrational. Just know that doctors too do dumb things, like racing bikes around city streets or muddy tracks. Now to the study, which is important on many fronts. First, as I said, millions of people are taking up the marathon. Second, exercise is clearly an underutilized therapy. And third, observational studies hint at, emphasis on hint, the notion that too much exercise may be detrimental to heart function. This study comes from a UK group led by Dr. Charlotte Bannister from University College London. The title says a lot. Emphasis, training for a first-time marathon reduces age-related aortic stiffening. Emphasis on training and first time. The goal was to determine whether real-world exercise training for the first-time marathon can reverse age-related aortic stiffening. The longitudinal before and after race study enrolled untrained but healthy people who signed up for the London Marathon. The authors enrolled people with no significant past medical history, no marathon running experience, and people who exercise less than 2 hours per week. They used MRI to measure aortic stiffness before training and a few weeks after the race so as to avoid post-race issues. Now, the average run times were slow. These are 4 to 5 hours, which the authors say corresponds to about 6 to 13 miles of running per week. The endpoint, aortic stiffness, is strongly correlated with chronological age, so any deviations from expected values may reflect between subjects' susceptibility to accelerated aging or, on the other hand, vascular adaptation. Importantly, 237 participants were enrolled. 71 did not run the marathon, 52 or 22% due to injury. The final study group was 139 people who completed the marathon. The main findings were 1, an increase in proximal descending aortic and distal aortic distensibility was found without significant changes in the ascending aorta distensibility. These changes were greater in older male participants with higher baseline blood pressure and slower running times. The increase in distal descending aortic distensibility equated to an average reduction in arterial age of about 4 years. There was also a modest reduction of blood pressure comparable to blood pressure medicine, for instance. Interestingly, there were only small gains in VO2 max, which suggests a change in aortic elasticity may have been independent of fitness. Now, here are some comments on this. I like this study because they showed that low-level exercise in nearly sedentary people had favorable changes in the body. Many studies have shown that. I like this study because the trove of people running marathons and doing triathlons these days is indeed a fertile source of data for studying the effects of exercise. I like this study because I learned something about aortic distensibility. I also love that the authors spent many hundreds of words discussing the study's limitations. I think the main discussion point here is that one could do this study with volunteers from any gym in the country without promoting the marathon. Participants ran 6 to 13 miles per week. That amount of exercise is great for health, but hardly enough for a marathon. What's more, 1 in 5 people in the study did not run the marathon because they were injured. In the clinic, the key to using exercise as a health intervention is sustainability and common sense, something people can do todos los días, every day. Targeting something more sensible like a 5K or 10K would, in my opinion, be a more sensible health goal. In fact, in future studies, this group could serve as the missing control arm of the current study. For health, exercise is great. The marathon, not so much. Oh, and by the way, only 4 days after publication, this paper's altmetric score is 1500. Perhaps that is an important meta signal. Next topic is hot spotting. In 2011, in The New Yorker, Atul Gawande featured the work of Dr. Jeffrey Brenner, formerly a family medicine physician in Camden, New Jersey. Brenner was trying to improve the health of patients labeled as high-complexity, high-cost super utilizers. These were patients in and out of the hospital all the time, and these were patients who had both medical and social challenges. Brenner founded the Camden Coalition of Healthcare Providers, and he called their intervention policy the Camden Core Model. Essentially, this was a team, an army of registered nurses, social workers, LPNs, community health workers, and health coaches who coordinated comprehensive follow-up at home and clinic visits and helped these vulnerable patients take advantage of social services and behavioral health programs. I heard Brenner speak at a Lown Institute meeting years ago, and he had stories of people who had been helped, and it was impossible not to be emotionally moved because anyone who has worked with underserved patients wants to help. It's normal. But Brenner did something really cool. And here I cite Dan Gorenstein's podcast called Trade-Offs. Quote, he took the unusual step of inviting the scrutiny of researchers. And New England Journal of Medicine published the RCT led by a team at MIT. The Camden model of intervention did not work any better than standard of care. Deborah Beck has a very nice newscap on this on the heart.org Medscape Cardiology. The 180-day readmission rate was 62% in the intervention group and 61% in the control group, not significantly different. But there was something even more remarkable in the paper. A comparison of the intervention group admissions during the 6 months before and after enrollment misleadingly suggested a 38 percentage point decline in admissions related to the intervention. That's because the comparison did not account for the similar decline in the control group. I'll come back to that point. It's crucial. This trial randomly assigned 800 patients with medically and socially complex conditions to the Camden Core Model or usual care. The primary endpoint was simple: readmissions in 6 months. The trial population was varied and probably pretty representative. About 1,500 patients were screened and about 800 enrolled. Now that's better than a lot of cardiology trials. Remember, if a trial enrolls only a few percent of those screened, then it suffers from poor external validity. And the authors gave the medical field such an enormous gift by showing what happened to admission rates for the intervention arm in the 6 months before and after enrollment. The 38 percentage point decrease in the probability of a hospital admission during the 6 months after the intervention as compared with the 6 months before shows exactly why RCTs are so much more powerful than observational studies. The decline misleads because there were similar declines in the control arm. Observational studies, especially ecological ones like those so often touted in cancer screening and the hospital readmission reduction programs, are fatally flawed because you don't know if the difference is just regression to the mean, random noise, performance bias, or Hawthorne effect, etc. Friends, every time someone uses causal language for observational studies, or every time an emotional anecdote tempts you to think causally, remember this paper. Put this one in your files. It's already in my Zotero program under evidence. When in doubt, randomize. Another lesson: taking care of medically and socially complex patients transcends medical practice. If you don't have food or roof or the means of transportation, the idea of managing diabetes or AFib or heart failure could almost be called magical thinking. Like it is in so many cardiac problems, the answer here to superutilizers in low-income areas of the U.S. is way upstream of doctors and nurses. This is a societal problem. For instance, when I go to cardiology meetings in U.S. cities, especially warm weather climates, the amount of homeless people there is shocking. And I may be wrong about this, but my probably naive observations are that I don't see this sort of problem in the European cities that host meetings. While I'm certain that there are challenging patients in other Western nations, I am not sure it is to the extent we have here. And that makes me think that the root problem is political, and so is the solution. Finally, the Camden Quorum problem that failed in this trial has already been expanded to other cities. The authors conclude their landmark paper by saying, essentially, hey there, well-meaning policy people, observational data are not enough. You need RCTs before implementing a policy. Last topic, in closing, the Heart.org Medscape Cardiology has a great features essay from interventional cardiologist Jaya Malidi. The title is "The War on Shock, Is Industry Leading the Charge?" I love her piece because she wonders how the medical community accepted an expensive device without outcomes evidence from RCTs. Now, in fact, there are even observational studies suggesting harm from the Impella mechanical support device. Here is a direct quote from her essay. The more important question we need to ask ourselves: how do we get to this juncture? Take a look at this short, well-crafted essay. Then pause to think about who should be leading the development of new devices. When we accept devices with dubious evidence, like the Watchman and Impella, it sure seems we are letting our industry partners lead rather than ourselves. So that's it for this week in cardiology. As always, I'm grateful that you listened. Thank you. And remember, if you like this podcast, please tell a friend, give us a review or rating. It helps other people find us. Until next week, this is John Mandrola from the Heart.org Medscape Cardiology.
You're listening to This Week in Cardiology from the Heart.org on Medscape.